morning, everyone. It is perhaps the ultimate testament to how far this region has come that they allow the mayor of St. Paul to come over to Minneapolis to talk about the differences between the two cities. This has only been tempered by the fact that my remarks were prepared by my policy director, who's a Minneapolis resident, and I think that gave the Minneapolis leaders confidence that I wouldn't go too far out on the limb. But when you come over to St. Paul in the next couple of days, I'll tell the real story that I can't tell here about the differences between the two cities. The fact of the matter is you can summarize the differences between the two cities by just kind of understanding their origins. Minneapolis was founded by a Catholic priest named Louis Hennepin, who came up with LaSalle to explore the Mississippi area, the River Valley. St. Paul was founded by a bootlegger named Pig's Eye. And those two facts have defined us ever since. The reality of it is Father Hennepin originally showed up at the Falls of St. Anthony, which were ultimately what became known as St. Anthony Falls, which were the only natural waterfalls on the Mississippi River. But had he shown up eons earlier, he would have shown up at St. Anthony Falls, but they would have been in basically downtown St. Paul. And of course, as a kid, you learn about geology, you understand erosion, and you understand water pouring over soft rock for millions and millions of years, and ultimately the falls moved upriver. But in St. Paul, we look at it and say, that is just so Minneapolis. They won't let us have anything. They even take our waterfalls, which should rightfully be in downtown St. Paul. But those falls actually play an important role because Minneapolis grew up as a milling town because they had access to the power of the river. St. Paul grew up more as a transportation town because we were the headwaters of the navigable portion of the Mississippi River. But the differences between our two communities, they have been very historic and they've been very profound. And you don't necessarily realize that, much less so today than if you had come here even a decade ago. The differences in the infighting between our two communities was very significant. But culturally, they're just very different communities. One writer, a woman named Mary Lethert Wingard, in a book called Claiming the City, wrote, "While Minneapolis is the last part of the 19th century, bore the stamp of Scandinavians, Protestants, and Republican Yankee progressives, St. Paul emerged as an Irish Catholic democratic stronghold. Increasingly overshadowed by the economic might of Minneapolis, out of necessity, St. Paul evolved complex alliances among business, labor, and the Catholic Church that cut across class and ethnic lines, a culture of compromise that sharply contrasted with Minneapolis's more strident labor politics." And so it wasn't just the fact that we were on one side of the river mostly and they were on the other side of the river mostly. It was the fact that we were just culturally very different towns. We had different bases of our economies that created different needs, and we had a different kind of work ethic and a kind of different alliance among different institutions in our two cities that sharply contrasted with each other. And these things ended up in a lot of very kind of heated contest over the years. There was the census wars. In the last part of the 1800s, the populations of Minneapolis and St. Paul were roughly equivalent. But the fact is, neither side wanted the other side to kind of get a lead on this. And so we literally, Ramsey County, which is the St. Paul side of the river, sent sheriff's deputies over to Minneapolis to confiscate their census records. And that seems absurd, but it's actually true. Earlier than that, and this is why we were so mad, was because in 1857, Minneapolis tried to steal the state capitol from the city of St. Paul. And bring it down to a little town in southern, or kind of south of here called St. Peter. It wasn't just about robbing Paul to pay St. Peter. It was the fact that this was part of a plan to ultimately move the state capitol where the folks in Minneapolis thought it rightfully belonged, which was Minneapolis. And now, as I watch what happens up at the state legislature sometime, I'm kind of mad at my forerunners that they didn't allow this to happen. But the fact of the matter is, what happened was the bill had been passed by the legislature. A guy named Joe Rolette was supposed to present it for signature to the governor. He actually got kidnapped by a bunch of St. Paul folks and he was literally held in a hotel in downtown St. Paul under armed guard for 5 days. While the folks sent a posse over from Minneapolis to try to find where Rolette was. And eventually they gave up, the session adjourned, and Minneapolis thought they would come back at some point and get the state capitol, but they never ultimately succeeded in that effort. So these battles were very real between our two cities, and they were persistent, and they really held, I think, our region back to what it could have become had we been from the beginning a more collaborative, a more cooperative region, much in the way that we are now. The fact of the matter is we are collaborating, not on every aspect of it, and we're not beyond any competitive juices that still flow a little bit through our two communities. But the fact that we have moved forward on transportation, on the Green Line, the opening of the Green Line was a tremendous testament to how far our region has come in terms of collaboration and working together. And it started, in some ways, that collaborative process began when Don Frazier and George Latimer were the two mayors of the respective cities and started incredible organizations dedicated to providing affordable housing as a regional solution to the problem. It was interrupted by a couple of years or a couple of terms of mayors that went back to that old us versus them mentality. And in 2005, when I was elected mayor, then mayor of Minneapolis, R.T. Rybeck, who had been in office for 4 years and really kind of on the butt end of this battle between the two communities, reached out and asked if I wanted to have lunch shortly after the election. And it was the most covered lunch, I think, in the history of this region, because the fact that the two mayors, as one of the first official acts of my tenure as mayor, sat down and said, how are we going to work together on issues like getting the Central Corridor line built, was a tremendous step forward. The fact of the matter is the whole construction of the Central Corridor light rail line was a battle. It was a testament to having community voices feeling, first of all, shut out of the process, but then ultimately lifted up and given power and a part of shaping that line. It was really an incredible kind of experience watching that evolve. In St. Paul, one of the huge battles that we faced was to try to get 3 additional stops in the communities that most needed transportation and first-class transportation access. It is not only because people understood the importance of this line coming through their community, but they also remembered the battles that were fought when the construction of the freeway, I-94, ripped the heart and soul out of the African-American community in the city of St. Paul, a very thriving, vibrant community where folks like Roy Wilkins came out of, called Rondo. And so the battle cry from the community was, we cannot allow another Rondo to happen. And the communities came together to demand that they be included in the benefits, as some of the conversation earlier, that they be in the benefits of what was going to happen with the construction of the light rail. And as a result of those voices being lifted up, the cost effectiveness index on the federal level, and I give incredible credit to Peter Rogoff and others that were part of that. The fact of the matter is the Obama administration changed the cost of effectiveness index from a pass-fail to a more open process so that we were allowed to include stops on that line that benefited the communities that most needed to be served by that. But when we started building that line, people came together in ways that they had never come together before. Projects like Irrigate, which was one of the groups coming together to say, well, how do we make sure that the arts and the cultural part of this line be fully realized and fully acknowledged and integrated as part of this from the beginning. The Central Corridor Funders Collaborative, a group of people that came together to say, how do we make sure that there is equity in that line? How do we make sure that there are opportunities for low-income housing and job creation for all of our communities and particularly for low-income and communities of color? The fact is we were able to overcome kind of historic differences, not just between the two cities and the two sides of the region, but among groups that had historically fought each other, to ultimately say, well, how do we actually work together? How do we collaborate? And how do we create something truly magical and really take advantage of this $1 billion worth of investment that we are creating along the University Avenue corridor? And it has worked tremendously. People that wanted to integrate biking and pedestrian access from the beginning were in that. The Big Picture Project, which was focused on affordable housing. Stops for Us, the reference that we talked about to the 3 additional stops. Friendly Streets, which was the biking and walking. And the Corridors of Opportunity. All of these folks were coming together to say, we're going to make sure that all voices are included, all people are benefited from this line, and I think it truly has happened. So last June, we had an inland monsoon. I didn't know such things occurred. On the opening day of the light rail line, we had this tremendous storm blow through. And a year's worth of planning for celebration was really kind of blown away in the span of about a half hour. And what was truly amazing as we kind of walked, it was kind of like walking through a battlefield. You know, there was crepe paper all over and tents blown to smithereens. But the fact of the matter is, almost every person that I talked to said, yeah, it's sad that we didn't get the full celebration that we wanted to. But over the last year, the work that we have done in collaboration, in cooperation, in partnership, to get to this day, to get to this celebration, has formed new bonds, new alliances, new allegiances in a way that nothing else has ever done in this community. It was truly, truly a remarkable day. So it was a building of trust. It was a building of, you know, reaching out political leadership, saying we are listening to you. We are going to take your concerns into consideration. And it reminds me of the Stephen Covey line that change comes at the speed of trust. The fact of the matter is, if we hadn't gone out, done the things that we needed to do to build the trust in our community that allowed people to be a part of this process and to understand that we were building this for them, not just passing it through them, then I don't think that the things that you're seeing along the Green Line simply would have happened. And so we're very proud of the work that we've done. We're very proud of the fact that old battles have been shed. Probably there'll be new ones coming up, we suspect. But the fact of the matter is, we are acting now as a region, and we understand that our competition isn't Minneapolis versus St. Paul. It is the Twin Cities region against global communities across the entire world. And when we come together, and I think as you'll see over the next couple of days, there are very few communities that can compete with the resources, the talent, and the potential of this region that you're sitting in today. So thank you all for being here. It's it's great to see so many people dedicated to the work that you all do. Thank you so much.